Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I'll be delivering both the Washington Report and the call to action. Let's get right to it. The House and Senate are still both in recess and will not return until September. Now let's talk a little bit more about what the EPA did last week in rescinding the endangerment finding. Last week, I noted that Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lee Zeldin's announcement of a proposed rulemaking by his agency rescinding the 2009 endangerment finding was big news. We had a lot to get through last week, so I only noted his announcement without really getting deep into it. I wanted to take the opportunity this week to discuss it more deeply because it truly is remarkable and highly significant. In making the announcement, the Environmental Protection Agency has done what few in Washington dare. That is, confront a regulatory cornerstone, long treated as political scripture. In making this announcement, Zeldin has not only taken a dagger to the heart of the Obama-era climate regime, he's taken a principled stand for limited government, energy freedom, and statutory fidelity. The endangerment finding, issued in December 2009, claimed that carbon dioxide and 5 other greenhouse gases, quote, endanger public health and welfare, unquote. That conclusion served as the legal foundation for the EPA's sweeping authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act. It was always a stretch, both scientifically and statutorily. Congress never intended for the Clean Air Act, enacted in 1970 to combat smog and toxic air pollutants, to serve as a climate change statute. That authority was conjured by bureaucratic and activist courts, not by elected lawmakers. By rescinding the endangerment finding, the EPA has begun to unwind what has become an economically suffocating climate command and control regime. That regime has imposed multi-trillion-dollar burdens on American consumers, automakers, truckers, energy producers, and small businesses, while achieving negligible impact on global temperatures. In the process, it has distorted market signals, empowered foreign adversaries, and encouraged the fiction that bureaucrats in Washington can fine-tune the global climate. The EPA's legal rationale for the rescission is sound. The agency now recognizes that the Clean Air Act was never intended to regulate global phenomena like climate change. The Act authorizes regulation of air pollutants that have local and regional impact, not gases that are globally distributed, naturally occurring, and essential for life on Earth. The reinterpretation aligns with recent Supreme Court rulings, including West Virginia versus EPA, which reaffirm that major questions of economic and political significance require clear congressional authorization. Critics claim the repeal will lead to environmental Armageddon. This is fear-mongering, not fact. The United States has reduced carbon emissions more than any other major economy over the last 2 decades, not because of EPA dictates, but thanks to innovation, market forces, and cleaner burning natural gas. The notion that the endangerment finding is the only barrier preventing climate catastrophe is a political fantasy propagated by those who equate government expansion with planetary salvation. Rescinding the finding doesn't ban environmental stewardship. It merely returns responsibility for climate policy to Congress, where it belongs. If elected officials believe regulating carbon dioxide is necessary, they're free to legislate accordingly. But such decisions must be made by accountable representatives, not unelected regulators hiding behind decades-old statutory language that was never meant for this purpose. The benefits of repeal are enormous. According to analyses from the Competitive Enterprise Institute and the Heritage Foundation, eliminating the greenhouse gas vehicle regulations tied to the endangerment finding could save consumers more than $50 billion annually and relieve small businesses of up to $170 billion in compliance costs. Reversing these policies will also revitalize consumer choice, particularly in the automobile sector, where federal mandates have distorted the market in favor of expensive, range-limited electric vehicles many Americans neither want nor can afford. Europe should take note. As Diana Furchtgott-Roth recently noted in The Telegraph, the U.S. shift away from top-down green mandates could give American automakers a decisive edge in global competition. While European manufacturers are forced to chase increasingly draconian emissions targets and EV quotas, American automakers may soon be free to respond to actual consumer demand, producing vehicles that are affordable, reliable, and suited to the realities of American life. The stakes are high. The Biden-era administrative state proved how quickly an unelected bureaucracy could impose sweeping restrictions in the name of climate virtue. Reversing the endangerment finding is not just a deregulatory action. It's a defense of the constitutional separation of powers. It's a rejection of the notion that administrative agencies can legislate by fiat. The EPA's move will no doubt face challenges and furious resistance from the environmental left. Let them come. The courts will now be forced to confront a question too long evaded. Does the law authorize this sweeping regulatory regime? Or was it always a bureaucratic overreach built on shaky scientific and legal foundations? Administrator Lee Zeldin deserves credit for his resolve. In an era when too many officials governed by political calculus and media appeasement, he has chosen principle over expediency. The EPA's proposal to rescind the endangerment finding may mark a turning point in the decades-long battle over the size, scope, and legitimacy of the regulatory state. It is a welcome return to sanity and the beginning of restoring common sense to environmental policy. Now let's take a moment to talk about debanking. President Trump last week directed federal bank regulators to ensure that no banks are engaged any longer in the practice of debanking, in which some bank customers are informed by their banks that they can no longer bank there. Sometimes they even have their accounts frozen. The president said he himself had been victim of debanking and wanted to ensure it ends, and that people and companies that have been debanked should have their accounts restored, and federal regulators should endeavor to ensure that everyone who was debanked should have their accounts restored. Now to the latest on the redistricting wars. Texas House Democrats are still on the lam, hiding outside the state to prevent Texas House Republicans from moving a piece of legislation that would redraw the map of Texas's 38 congressional seats. The current map breaks the delegation into 25 Republican seats and 13 Democrat seats. The proposed new map would create 30 Republican seats and 8 Democrat seats, netting 5 more seats for the Republicans to help Mike Johnson maintain the first name he likes best, Speaker. To that end, Texas's Republican Governor Greg Abbott last Monday directed the Texas Rangers to investigate the delinquent House Democrats on potential violations of Texas law, including bribery. Abbott further said the investigation should include anyone who aided or abetted such potential crimes. Meanwhile, Democrat governors in California, New York, and Illinois, the 3 biggest blue states in the country, made common cause with the fleeing Texas House Democrats, hosting them for press conferences about the threat to democracy posed by Texas Republicans' determination to redraw their congressional map. Jesus spoke of this phenomenon in the book of Matthew, quote, "Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye." In other words, the Democrat governors of California, New York, and Illinois are the very last people in America who should be talking about a threat to democracy posed by Texas Republicans' decision to remap their state's congressional delegation. Their states are already gerrymandered so badly, it's a joke. Consider, in New York in 2024, Democrats won 57% of all the votes cast for candidates for the House of Representatives. Republicans won 42% of those votes. You'd think that Democrats should control somewhere around 57% of the seats in the House delegation then, right? Maybe a little bit more as sort of a victory bonus, a prize for doing so well that they controlled the state House and the state Senate and the governor's mansion. Let's call it a gerrymander bonus if you want to. But it turns out the Democrats control 19 seats, while the Republicans have just 7. That's a 73 to 27% split, representing a 16% gerrymander bonus. Well, you say, that's New York. Everyone knows New York is controlled by Democrats and has been for a long time. Let's look at California. In 2024, Democrat candidates for the U.S. House of Representatives won 60% of the votes cast, while Republicans won 40% of the votes cast. But Democrats control 43 seats in California's delegation, while Republicans control just 9. That's an 83 to 17% split, meaning California Democrats gave themselves a 23% gerrymander bonus. And Illinois Democrats? Well, they won 53% of all the votes cast for U.S. House candidates in 2024 in the state, while Republicans won 47%. But Illinois Democrats control 14 congressional seats, while Republicans control 3. That's right. Illinois Democrats drew a map that turned a 53 to 47 advantage into a 14 to 3 congressional district advantage. You heard that right. 14 seats in their state's delegation in Washington, while Republicans control just 3. That's an 82 to 18% split, meaning Illinois Democrats gave themselves a 29% gerrymander bonus. Now, let's look at Texas. In 2024, Republicans in Texas won 59% of all the votes cast for candidates for the U.S. House, while Democrats won 40% of the votes cast. Republicans control 66% of the seats, while Democrats control 34%. In other words, Texas Republicans enjoy only a 6% gerrymander bonus compared to New York's 16%, California's 23%, and Illinois' 29%. But wait, you say, you haven't accounted for the new map in Texas. So let's do that. Under the new map, Texas Republicans would, if all goes right, control 30 seats, while Democrats would control just 8. That's a 79 to 21% split, meaning Texas Republicans would have given themselves a 20% gerrymander bonus, still less than what Democrats did for themselves in Illinois, New York, and California. And here's the cherry on top of this hypocrisy sundae. California and Illinois aren't just screaming bloody murder about what Texas Republicans are doing to try to catch up to Democrats in the gerrymandering wars. They're actually threatening to redraw their own congressional maps to make them even more lopsided. California Democrats think they can squeeze another 5 seats out of their map, reducing the Republican representation from 9 seats down to just 4, and increasing the Democrat voter control, the congressional seat control, from 43 all the way up to 48. Meanwhile, Illinois Democrats think they can redraw their map to virtually eliminate all the Republicans in their U.S. House delegation. And maybe they can. Stay tuned. Now let's talk about investigating the Russia collusion hoax. The Department of Justice is taking the whole Russiagate hoax investigation seriously. Last week, Attorney General Pam Bondi demanded archived intelligence assessments from the National Archives and Records Administration from the nearly 10-year-old 2016 presidential campaign. On a separate track, she ordered a grand jury to potentially hear evidence in the case. The DOJ did not say where the grand jury would be impaneled. Now to the latest on Russia and Ukraine. 2 weeks ago, President Trump said he was going to reduce the 50 days he had given Russian dictator Vladimir Putin to come to a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine to 10 to 12 days, or Trump would impose new sanctions on Russia. 12 days later was Friday. Friday came and went without any announcement of new sanctions against Russia. On Saturday, though, the White House announced that later this week, on Friday, President Trump will meet in Alaska with Vladimir Putin at a location to be named later. At first, it was said that Trump had insisted that Putin agree to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as a condition for meeting with Trump. But the White House later said there was no condition for the meeting. As of this writing on Monday morning, the White House is still considering bringing Zelensky into the meeting, but no decision to invite the Ukrainian has yet been made. Putin put forth a ceasefire proposal in which Russian forces would abide by a ceasefire if Ukraine agreed to cede to Russia Ukrainian territory that Ukraine still controls in the eastern part of its country. That was an obvious non-starter in Kyiv. Shortly thereafter, Zelensky, who had been meeting over the weekend with European leaders to make sure that no matter what happens in a Trump-Putin meeting, the Europeans still have his back, they all put out a joint statement with the European leaders that offered a counter-proposal of their own. The European counter-proposal says that a ceasefire must take place before any other steps are taken, and says that territory can be exchanged only in a reciprocal manner. If Ukraine pulls out of some regions, then Russia must withdraw from others. Most importantly, the European proposal says that any territorial concessions made by Ukraine must be safeguarded by ironclad security guarantees from the West, including potential NATO membership for Ukraine. The Finnish president called President Trump on Saturday afternoon to present him the European counter-proposal. In the miscellaneous category this week, last Monday, Fox News reported that at a weekend conference in Mexico City, Illinois Democrat Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, who is the child of immigrant parents and who, according to her website, is married to an illegal alien, said, and I quote, "I'm a proud Guatemalan before I'm an American," end quote. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice has opened a criminal investigation into New York Attorney General Letitia James to determine whether she criminally deprived President Trump of his civil rights. This is not to be confused with the already existing FBI investigation into James for mortgage fraud related to homes she bought in Virginia and Brooklyn. That investigation was announced by the U.S. Attorney in Albany in May. And our friend Ed Martin, who's been serving as the pardon attorney at the Department of Justice, will lead the Department of Justice Weaponization Working Group, which aims to crack down on what it calls abuses of the criminal justice process. His first assignment will focus on investigating two of President Trump's most vocal opponents, that same New York Attorney General Letitia James and California's U.S. Senator Adam Schiff. Now to The Jenny Beth Show. Episode 133 of The Jenny Beth Show dropped Wednesday, featuring Jenny Beth's conversation with Rosemary Jenks, co-founder and policy director of the Immigration Accountability Project. The two have a rather intense discussion of election integrity, illegal voting, and the growing threat of amnesty for illegal aliens. Rosemary explains why the SAVE Act, which would require proof of citizenship to register to vote, is urgently needed, and how non-citizens are already being registered to vote through loopholes in the motor voter law. The two also expose the truth about proposed amnesty bills, like the so-called Dignity Act, the role of cheap labor lobbyists, and the human cost of open borders, including trafficking and exploitation. As always, it's highly recommended. And that's our Washington report for this week. Now to the call to action. We still need your help urging the Senate to move forward and move faster on confirming Trump nominees. As we've discussed, there are still more than 100 Trump nominees waiting to be confirmed, and we need the Senate to move on them. Also, we need your help preparing for our Only Citizens Vote bus tour, which kicks off next week in California. Please sign up to let us know you want to help us make the SAVE Act a reality. And we still need your help in opposing the so-called Dignity Act, which is a nice name for what it really is, an amnesty bill by another name. So please, call your congressman or congresswoman and tell him or her to oppose the Dignity Act and its amnesty for illegal aliens. Well, that's our broadcast for this week. Thanks for tuning in. Please take a moment to share this with your Facebook friends and elsewhere on your social media accounts. We'll see you next week, same place, same time. Until then, be well and be active.